Before we begin, please subscribe and click like, and tell me, from which city or country are you listening? The cold stone floor of Thornfield Castle's library pressed against Rose Ashford's burning cheek as darkness claimed her. She had been scrubbing the ancient fireplace since 4 in the morning, her hands raw and bleeding, her body shaking with fever. 23 years old and already a widow, Rose had learned that survival meant pushing past pain, past exhaustion, past the moment when your body begged you to stop. But this morning, her body had simply given up without asking permission. She didn't hear the library door open, didn't hear the sharp intake of breath or the rapid footsteps crossing the marble floor. The Earl of Thornfield, Adrian Blackwood, had come down early to retrieve a book before his morning ride, expecting to find the room empty and cold. Instead, he found a woman collapsed on his floor, her dark hair spilling from beneath her servant's cap, her lips pale as death. Adrian dropped to his knees beside her, his heart hammering in a way that startled him. He'd seen suffering before. It was impossible to own an estate this size and remain blind to hardship, but something about the sight of this young woman, clearly pushed beyond her limits, ignited something protective and fierce in his chest. He pressed his hand to her forehead and felt the dangerous heat radiating from her skin. "Christ," he muttered, and without hesitation he gathered her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, her body slight from too many missed meals. As he lifted her, she stirred slightly, her eyes fluttering open for just a moment. They were grey, he noticed, the colour of storm clouds over the Yorkshire moors. "My lord," she whispered, confusion and fear flickering across her fevered face. "I'm sorry. I'll finish. Please don't." "Hush," Adrian said, his voice gentler than he'd heard it in years. He carried her toward the door, her head lolling against his chest. The servants would be shocked. A nobleman carrying a lowly maid through his own home, but Adrian found he didn't care. As he climbed the stairs to the guest wing, he looked down at her flushed face and said softly, "You belong here." The words surprised him, even as he spoke them, but they felt true in a way he couldn't explain. Mrs. Henderson, the head housekeeper, nearly dropped her lamp when she saw the Earl carrying Rose down the corridor. "My lord, what has happened? Send for Dr. Fletcher immediately," Adrian commanded, his tone brooking no argument. "This woman is seriously ill. Prepare the Rose room." "But my lord, she's only a—" "Now, Mrs. Henderson." The housekeeper's mouth snapped shut. She had served the Blackwood family for 30 years and had never seen the Earl look at anyone the way he was looking at the unconscious girl in his arms, as though she were made of precious glass that might shatter at any moment. Within the hour, Rose found herself in a bed so soft she thought she must be dreaming or dying or both. The fever had turned her thoughts to liquid, memories and sensations flowing together without order. She remembered her husband Thomas, crushed beneath machinery in the factory, remembered the creditors taking everything, even her wedding ring, remembered the choice between the workhouse and Thornfield Castle, and how she'd walked 30 miles through winter rain to take the position as the lowest servant in the household. A cool cloth touched her forehead, and she opened her eyes to find a grey-haired man with kind eyes examining her. "Easy now, my dear," Dr. Fletcher said. "You've given us quite a scare. When did you last eat a full meal?" Rose tried to remember, and couldn't. I send most of my wages to my sister in London. She's only 16. If I lose this position, you're not losing anything," a deep voice said from the doorway. Rose turned her head and saw him, the Earl, Lord Adrian Blackwood, 33 years old, and devastatingly handsome in a way that made her chest ache. His dark hair was slightly dishevelled, his grey eyes intense as they fixed on her. "You're going to rest, eat, and recover. That's an order." "My lord, I should return to my duties." "Your duty," Adrian interrupted, stepping into the room, "is to not die in my library. I consider that a reasonable request." Despite her fever, Rose felt a flutter of something warm in her chest. Was he? Was that humour in his voice? Nobleman didn't joke with servants. They barely acknowledged their existence. Dr. Fletcher closed his bag with a decisive snap. She needs rest, nourishing food, and warmth. Keep her in this room for at least a week. The fever should break in a few days if we're careful. He looked at Adrian with meaningful emphasis. She's been worked half to death, my lord. If she'd gone another day like this, we'd be planning a funeral. Adrian's jaw tightened. Find out who's been assigning her duties. I want a full report. Over the next 3 days, Rose drifted between fever dreams and waking moments of confusion. But every time she opened her eyes, there seemed to be fresh flowers by her bedside. Clean nightgowns appeared. Meals arrived on silver trays, real meals, with meat and vegetables and fresh bread that made her want to weep. And sometimes, when the fever was at its worst, she could swear she heard that deep voice reading aloud, the words of Wordsworth and Tennyson washing over her like a balm. Rose woke on the 4th morning to find sunlight streaming through lace curtains, and her fever, finally, blessedly broken. Worriedy. She felt weak, but clear-headed for the first time in what seemed like forever. A maid she didn't recognize was setting down a breakfast tray when she stirred. "Oh, you're awake! I'll fetch Mrs. Henderson." The girl hurried out before Rose could ask any questions. Rose sat up slowly, taking in the room. The Rose Room, Mrs. Henderson had called it. The walls were papered in delicate pink roses, the furniture was mahogany and elegant, and the bed she occupied could have fit 4 people comfortably. It was the kind of room that aristocratic guests would stay in, not a servant who'd been scrubbing fireplaces a few days ago. The door opened, and Mrs. Henderson entered, followed by, Rose's breath caught, the Earl himself. "How are you feeling?" Adrian asked, and there was genuine concern in his voice that made Rose's heart skip. "Much better, my lord, thank you. I'm so sorry for the trouble I've caused. I should return to my duties." "You'll do no such thing," Adrian said firmly. He pulled a chair close to the bed and sat, which was so improper that Rose felt heat rush to her cheeks. Mrs. Henderson looked like she might faint. "Dr. Fletcher says you need another week of rest before resuming any work, and when you do return, you'll be reassigned to lighter duties." "But, my lord, I need the wages from the scullery work." "My sister, your wages will not change," Adrian interrupted. "Mrs. Henderson, please ensure that Miss Ashford's salary is adjusted to reflect a more appropriate position. Senior housemaid, I think." Rose's eyes widened. A senior housemaid earned nearly 3 times what she'd been making. "My lord, I couldn't possibly—" "You read, don't you?" Adrian asked suddenly. The question startled her. "Yes, my lord. My father was a schoolteacher before he died. He taught me." Adrian's eyes lit with something that looked almost like satisfaction. "Then it's settled. Part of your new duties will be organizing and maintaining my private library. The previous librarian was ancient and half-blind. The cataloging system is a disaster." He stood, clearly considering the matter closed. "Rest today. Tomorrow, if you're feeling strong enough, you may join me for tea in the library. We'll discuss what needs to be done." He left before Rose could formulate a response. Mrs. Henderson trailing behind him with a stunned expression. Rose sank back against the pillows, her mind reeling. What had just happened? Earls didn't take tea with servants. They didn't personally ensure their comfort or offer them promotions. They certainly didn't look at them the way Lord Blackwood had looked at her, as though she mattered. The next afternoon, Rose made her way to the library on trembling legs, wearing the best dress she owned, which was still clearly a servant's dress, plain grey wool with a white collar. But she'd brushed her dark hair until it shone and pinned it up neatly. Whatever this was, she wanted to face it with dignity. Adrian was standing by the window when she entered, sunlight gilding his profile. He turned at the sound of her footsteps and smiled. Actually smiled, and Rose felt her breath catch again. "Miss Ashford, please, sit. Tea should be here momentarily." Rose perched nervously on the edge of an armchair, very aware that this was the same room where she'd collapsed. Adrian sat across from her, and for a moment they simply looked at each other. His eyes were extraordinarily beautiful, she thought, and then immediately felt ashamed for thinking it. "Tell me about yourself," Adrian said. "Your real self, not just the servant who arrived here a month ago. Who is Rose Ashford?" No one had asked her that question in so long that Rose felt tears prick her eyes. I'm a widow, my lord. My husband died in a factory accident 8 months ago. We'd been married less than a year. After he died, I discovered we were deeply in debt. The creditors took everything. My younger sister Mary and I had nowhere to go. I heard Thornfield Castle was hiring, so I—" She gestured helplessly. "You walked here," Adrian said quietly. "Mrs. Henderson told me. 30 miles in winter. Mary needed to stay in London. She has work as a seamstress, but her wages are tiny. Between us, we can afford to rent a small room and keep her fed. If I can send her enough money each month, she can avoid—" Rose's voice broke. "She can avoid what happens to desperate girls in London." Adrian's expression darkened. "I understand." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his gaze intense. "You're educated. You're clearly intelligent. Why were you assigned to the hardest, lowest work in the house?" Rose hesitated, then decided honesty was her only option. "Some of the other servants, they knew I was new and desperate. They thought I was trying to put on airs because I can read and write. So they made sure I got the worst duties. I didn't complain because I couldn't risk losing the position." "That ends now," Adrian said flatly. "You will work directly with me on the library. And Rose, may I call you Rose?" She nodded, unable to speak. "Rose, I want you to understand something. In this house, you are under my protection. Anyone who treats you poorly will answer to me. You are not invisible. Not anymore." The tea arrived then, saving Rose from having to respond to words that threatened to undo her completely. As the maid set down the service and left, Rose tried to steady her shaking hands. Adrian poured for both of them, which was utterly backward. She should be serving him, but when she tried to protest, he silenced her with a look. They talked for over an hour. Adrian asked about her father, her childhood, the books she loved. Rose found herself telling him about her dreams of becoming a teacher, dreams that had died with her father and been buried with her husband. Adrian listened as though every word mattered, and by the time Rose finally left the library, her heart was racing for reasons that had nothing to do with her recent illness. She was halfway to the servants' quarters when she heard the whispers. "Did you see her coming out of the library? Having tea with his lordship, as if she's a fine lady. She's trying to catch his eye, mark my words. Shameless." Rose kept her head high and kept walking, but the words stung. She wasn't trying to catch anyone's eye. She was just— what was she doing? Surviving, she told herself, accepting kindness from an employer who happened to be decent. That was all. But as she lay in her narrow bed that night, back in the servants' quarters now that she'd recovered, she couldn't stop thinking about the way Adrian had looked at her, as though she were someone worth knowing, as though she were someone who belonged in beautiful rooms, drinking tea from china cups. It was dangerous, this feeling blooming in her chest, dangerous and impossible and completely foolish, but Rose had been numb for so long that feeling anything, even something doomed, was almost a relief. The following week brought a change to Thornfield Castle that set everyone talking. Lady Victoria Pemberton arrived. Rose was in the library, carefully cataloguing a stack of first editions, when she heard the commotion in the entrance hall. Horses, carriages, trunks being unloaded. The unmistakable sounds of wealth and importance demanding attention. Mrs. Henderson appeared in the library doorway, her expression tight. "Miss Ashford, Lady Victoria has arrived for an extended visit. Lord Blackwood's fiancée." The word sounded sour in her mouth. "The staff is to be on their best behavior. She's very particular about things." Rose felt something cold settle in her stomach. Fiancé. Of course Lord Blackwood had a fiancé. Men of his station always did, marriages arranged for advantage and bloodlines. Whatever kindness he'd shown her had been just that, Kindness to a servant, nothing more. I understand, Mrs. Henderson. Thank you for telling me. But understanding and accepting were two different things, and as Rose tried to focus on her work, she found the words on the pages swimming before her eyes. That evening, Rose saw Lady Victoria for the first time at dinner. The servants were setting up the formal dining room, and Rose had been sent to deliver fresh candles. She arrived just as Lady Victoria swept into the room on Adrian's arm, and the sight of her drove the air from Rose's lungs. Victoria Pemberton was magnificent. Tall, blonde, statuesque, she wore a gown of emerald silk that probably cost more than Rose would earn in 5 years. Diamonds glittered at her throat and ears. Her beauty was the kind that made men write poetry and start wars. And the way she clung to Adrian's arm, smiling up at him with proprietary satisfaction, made Rose want to disappear into the floor. But then Rose noticed something else. Adrian wasn't smiling. His expression was polite but distant, the warmth she'd seen in the library completely absent. He looked like a man performing an unpleasant duty. "Darling, you must tell me who's been managing your library," Victoria was saying in a voice like honey and ice. "I notice the catalogue is in complete disarray. Surely you can hire someone competent." "I have," Adrian said quietly. "Miss Ashford is handling it quite well." Victoria's blue eyes snapped to Rose, who was standing frozen by the sideboard with candles in her hands. The look Victoria gave her was sharp and assessing, the way one might examine a bug before crushing it. A servant? Adrian, really? Surely someone of better breeding. "Miss Ashford is educated and extremely capable," Adrian said, and there was steel in his voice now. "The work is progressing excellently." Victoria's smile didn't waver, but her eyes narrowed slightly. "How progressive of you, darling." She turned to Rose with a smile that made Rose's skin crawl. "Girl, those candles are dripping wax on the carpet. Do be more careful." Rose looked down and saw with horror that Victoria was right. Her hands had been shaking so badly that wax had indeed dripped onto the expensive Persian rug. "I'm so sorry, my lady. I'll clean it immediately." "See that you do," Victoria said dismissively, already turning back to Adrian. "Now, about the wedding preparations. Mother insists we finalize the guest list this week." Rose fled the dining room, her cheeks burning with humiliation. But not before she caught Adrian's eyes on her, filled with something that looked like apology. Or was that just wishful thinking? Over the next few days, Rose tried to make herself invisible, focusing solely on her library work. But Victoria seemed to have a talent for appearing wherever Rose was. In the hallway, Victoria would brush past her without acknowledgement, as if Rose were furniture. In the drawing room, Victoria would interrupt if Rose was delivering books or messages, always finding some small fault to point out in front of others. But worse than the casual cruelty was the way Victoria looked at Adrian, and the way she watched Adrian look at Rose. Because he did look at her. Rose tried to pretend she didn't notice, tried to convince herself she was imagining things, but she could feel his gaze following her across rooms. When she brought books to his study, he would find excuses to keep her there, asking her opinions on authors and ideas. Their conversations had a quality of stolen time, as though both of them knew they were taking something they shouldn't have. Victoria noticed everything. It came to a head one afternoon when Rose was on a ladder in the library, reaching for a volume on a high shelf. She didn't hear Victoria enter, didn't know she was there until that honey and ice voice cut through the silence. "So you're the little mouse who's caught my fiancé's attention." Rose nearly fell off the ladder. She climbed down carefully, clutching the book to her chest like armor. "My lady, I'm just doing my work." "Don't play innocent with me," Victoria said, moving closer. Up close, her beauty was intimidating, perfect and hard as marble. "I've seen how he looks at you, how you look at him. I don't know what you mean. You're clever, I'll give you that. Playing the poor, pathetic widow, making yourself useful. But let me be very clear, Miss Ashford." Victoria's voice dropped to a whisper that was somehow more frightening than a shout. "Adrian is mine. His title, his fortune, his name, all mine. You are nothing. You will always be nothing. And if you continue this little game, I will make sure you leave Thornfield in disgrace and never work again anywhere in England. Your sister in London, Mary, isn't it? She'll end up exactly where you fear. Because I can make that happen. Rose felt ice water pour through her veins. You wouldn't try me, Victoria said with a smile. Then she swept out of the library, leaving Rose trembling with fury and fear. That evening, Adrian requested Rose's presence in his study to discuss a book order, and Rose knew she had to end whatever this was before Victoria destroyed her. She knocked on the heavy oak door, her heart hammering, and entered when he called. Adrian was standing by the fireplace, and the moment their eyes met, Rose felt that dangerous pull again, that sense that they were two magnets being drawn together despite every force trying to keep them apart. "Rose," he said, and just her name in his voice made her want to weep. "I wanted to apologize for Victoria's behavior. She can be difficult." "She's your fiancée," Rose said, forcing the words out. "She has every right to be concerned about propriety." "Does she?" Adrian moved closer. "Rose, I need to tell you something." "No," Rose interrupted, stepping back. "My lord, please. This, whatever this is, it has to stop. Lady Victoria has made it clear that I'm here on borrowed time. I can't lose this position. My sister depends on me." "Victoria threatened you." Adrian's voice turned dangerous. "What did she say?" Rose shook her head. "It doesn't matter. What matters is that you're engaged to her. You have responsibilities, a reputation to maintain, and I'm just a servant. We both know how this ends if we continue." "And how does it end?" Adrian asked. And he was close now, so close she could see the flecks of blue in his grey eyes. "With me married to a woman I don't love? With you cataloguing books and avoiding my eyes? Is that what you want?" "What I want doesn't matter," Rose whispered. "What I want has never mattered. It matters to me." The words hung between them, heavy with everything they couldn't say. Rose felt tears burn her eyes. "My lord, Adrian, please don't make this harder than it already is. I'll finish the library work as quickly as possible, and then I'll request a transfer to another part of the house. We'll barely see each other. It's better this way." "Is it?" Adrian reached out and gently caught her chin, tilting her face up to meet his gaze. "Because it feels like the worst idea I've ever heard." Rose pulled away before she could do something unforgivable, like lean into his touch. "I should go. I'm sorry." She fled before he could respond, tears streaming down her face. She had done the right thing, the only thing. So why did it feel like she'd just torn her own heart out? For the next week, Rose kept her promise. She avoided the library when Adrian was there, worked in the early mornings and late evenings, and communicated through brief professional notes left on his desk. She saw him at a distance, in hallways, through doorways, and each glimpse was a knife to the chest. Victoria noticed the change and looked like a cat who'd caught a particularly satisfying mouse. She became almost pleasant to Rose, which was somehow worse than her cruelty. The message was clear: know your place, and I'll allow you to keep it. But Adrian was not so easily managed. Rose was shelving books in a remote corner of the library late one evening, thinking she was alone, when she heard the door lock click. She turned to find Adrian leaning against the door, his expression somewhere between tortured and determined. "We need to talk," he said. "My lord, this isn't appropriate." "Stop it!" He crossed the room in long strides. "Stop calling me my lord in that distant voice. Stop pretending we're nothing to each other. I can't do this anymore, Rose. I can't pretend I don't think about you every waking moment. I can't pretend that seeing you avoid me doesn't make me want to set this entire damned estate on fire." Rose backed up until she hit the bookshelf. "Adrian, you're engaged to a woman my father chose before he died. A woman I've known for years and have never once felt anything for beyond mild tolerance. And then you collapsed on my library floor, and suddenly nothing else made sense anymore." "This is impossible," Rose said, but her voice was shaking. "You know it's impossible. The scandal, your reputation. I don't care. Yes, you do. And even if you didn't, Victoria made it very clear what will happen to me and to Mary if I don't stay away from you. Adrian's eyes flashed with fury. She threatened your sister. She threatened everything, and she can do it, Adrian. Women like her always can. Adrian was silent for a long moment. Then he said quietly, "What if I broke the engagement?" Rose's heart stopped. "You can't do that." "Why not?" Because it's done. Because society would—" "I don't care about society." "Well, I do." Rose's voice broke. "I care that Mary won't starve. I care that I won't end up in the workhouse or worse. I care that you won't lose everything your family built because you had some fleeting feelings for a servant you barely know." "Fleeting?" Adrian laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Rose, I haven't felt anything real in 10 years. Not since my parents died. I've been going through the motions, playing the role of the Earl, agreeing to marriages of convenience because what did it matter? And then you looked at me with those grey eyes, and I felt human again. That's not fleeting." Rose felt her carefully constructed walls crumbling. "Even if that's true, it doesn't change reality. You have responsibilities. I have responsibilities. Sometimes love—" The word slipped out before she could stop it, and they both froze. "Sometimes caring about someone means protecting them from yourself. Is that what you think?" Adrian asked softly. "That you need to protect me?" "Someone has to." He reached out and cupped her face in his hands, his touch achingly gentle. "What if I don't want protection? What if I want you?" Rose closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Adrian, please don't make me choose between you and my sister's survival. That's not fair." She felt him tense, then slowly release her. When she opened her eyes, he looked devastated. "You're right. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have cornered you like this." He turned to leave, and Rose felt panic seize her chest. "Adrian, wait!" But he was already unlocking the door, his shoulders rigid. "Finish the library work. However you see fit. I won't bother you again." The door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded like an ending. Rose slid down the bookshelf to the floor and buried her face in her hands. She had done the right thing, the smart thing, the only thing that would keep both of them safe. So why did it feel like dying? 2 days later, Victoria cornered Rose in the hallway outside the servants' quarters and delivered her final blow. "I've spoken with Adrian," she said with a triumphant smile. "He's agreed that having you here is awkward. You'll be leaving Thornfield at the end of the week. With an excellent reference, of course, and 2 months' wages. I'm not unreasonable." Rose felt the world tilt. "He's dismissing me? He's doing what's necessary. Surely you understand. Fresh starts for everyone." Victoria examined her perfect nails. "I've also taken the liberty of writing to several houses in Yorkshire. I'm afraid word has gotten around that you're difficult. I doubt you'll find placement nearby, but I'm sure London has opportunities for a woman of your skills." Her smile sharpened. "Though perhaps not the kinds of opportunities you'd hope for your sister." The threat was clear. Go quietly, or Mary would pay the price. Victoria had checkmated her completely. Rose packed her few belongings that night with trembling hands. She would leave in the morning before Adrian woke. It was better this way, cleaner. She would return to London, find some kind of work, any kind of work. She and Mary would survive, they always had. But as she tied up her bundle and prepared to slip out in the pre-dawn darkness, Rose realized she couldn't leave without seeing the library one last time. The place where she'd collapsed and been saved. The place where, for a few brief weeks, she'd felt like she belonged somewhere beautiful. The castle was silent as Rose made her way through the dark corridors. She opened the library door and stood breathing in the scent of old leather and paper, memorizing the way moonlight fell across the reading chairs. "I thought I might find you here." Rose spun to find Adrian standing in the doorway, still dressed, as though he hadn't slept at all. In the moonlight, he looked haggard and beautiful and furious. "I didn't agree to dismiss you," he said flatly. "Victoria lied. I'm beginning to realize she does that a lot." "It doesn't matter," Rose said, clutching her bundle. She made it clear what will happen if I stay. I can't risk Mary. What if I told you I've ended the engagement? Rose's breath stopped. What? Adrian stepped into the library and closed the door. I told Victoria this afternoon that I won't marry her. I've already written to her father. It's done. Adrian, no, you can't. The scandal is mine to weather, Adrian said, and his voice was steel. Do you know what Victoria said when I told her? She said she didn't care about me, she only wanted the title. She threatened to destroy your reputation and your sister's if I didn't send you away. So I called her bluff. I told her if she makes any move against you or Mary, I'll make sure every drawing room in England knows exactly the kind of woman she is. His eyes were blazing now. No one threatens you, Rose. No one. Rose felt her legs give out. She sank into the nearest chair, her bundle falling to the floor. You ended your engagement. For me. Yes. But I'm nobody. I'm a servant. I'm a widow with no family, no prospects. You're the woman I love, Adrian interrupted, and suddenly he was kneeling in front of her, taking her cold hands in his warm ones. You're the person who makes me want to be better, do better. You're the first real thing I've felt in a decade, and if you walk out that door, you'll take my heart with you. Rose stared at him, this man who was risking everything, his reputation, his standing, his entire future, for her. The society will never accept me as your wife. Then society can rot, Adrian said simply. Rose, I'm not asking you to be a countess. I'm asking you to be with me. We'll face whatever comes together. I'll protect you. I'll protect Mary. I'll give your sister a position here if she wants it, a safe place to live. But please, please don't leave. Rose touched his face with shaking fingers, hardly believing this was real. If I stay, if we do this, there's no going back. You'll lose friends, invitations, your family connections. I'll gain you, Adrian said. That's more than a fair trade. And Rose, who had spent years surviving, who had taught herself not to hope for more than she needed to live one more day, finally let herself believe. I love you, she whispered. I've been trying so hard not to, but I do. Adrian pulled her into his arms, holding her as though she were infinitely precious. Then stay, belong here, with me. Let me give you the life you deserve. Rose buried her face in his shoulder and felt something break open in her chest. All the fear and pain and desperate hope she'd been holding back. Yes, she said, yes. When Adrian tilted her face up and kissed her, it felt like coming home. Like finding a place she'd been searching for her entire life without knowing it existed. The library around them, the place where she'd fallen and been lifted, where she'd been seen and valued, bore witness to the moment when Rose Ashford stopped merely surviving and started truly living. Outside the windows, dawn was breaking over Thornfield Castle, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. And inside, two people who had been alone learned what it meant to belong to each other, propriety and social rules be damned. The real battle, they both knew, was just beginning. But they would face it together. Rose left the library with Adrian's promise that he would handle Victoria's fury, but she wasn't prepared for the storm that awaited. By breakfast, every servant in Thornfield Castle knew that Lady Victoria's trunks had been packed in the dead of night, and she'd departed in a rage before dawn. The whispers started immediately, poisonous and spreading like wildfire. Some said the Earl had caught Lady Victoria in an indiscretion. Others said she'd left him. But the most vicious whispers, the ones that made Rose's stomach turn, said that the Earl had broken his engagement because he'd been seduced by a scheming servant. Mrs. Henderson summoned Rose to her office with a face like thunder. "Is it true?" the housekeeper demanded. "Has his lordship ended his engagement with Lady Victoria?" "I believe so, ma'am," Rose said quietly. "Because of you?" Rose lifted her chin. "I didn't ask him to. I tried to leave. But yes, he says he has feelings for me." Mrs. Henderson closed her eyes as though in pain. "Child, Do you have any idea what you've done? The scandal this will cause. Lady Victoria's family has connections throughout England. They could destroy this estate's reputation, and yours along with it." "I know," Rose whispered, "but I can't help how he feels, or how I feel." "Feelings," Mrs. Henderson said bitterly. "Feelings don't pay wages or put food on tables. When the Pemberton family is done, you'll be lucky if you can find work as a scullery maid in the worst house in England." She shook her head. "I hope he's worth it, girl, because you've just painted a target on your back that will follow you for the rest of your life." Rose felt tears burn her eyes, but refused to let them fall. "He is worth it." She left the office with her head high, but her hands were shaking. What had she done? Not just to herself, but to Adrian. Mrs. Henderson was right. The Pemberton family would seek revenge, and Rose, with her common birth and lack of connections, would be the easiest target. She was heading back to her quarters when she heard the shouting coming from the entrance hall. A man's voice, cultured and furious, echoed through the manor. "I demand to see Blackwood immediately. This is an outrage." Rose peered around the corner to see a tall, silver-haired man in an expensive coat, Lord Pemberton himself, Victoria's father. Behind him stood two other men, equally well-dressed and angry-looking. Adrian stood at the top of the grand staircase, his expression carved from ice. "Pemberton," Adrian said coldly, "I received your letter. As I explained, the engagement is terminated." "Terminated?" Lord Pemberton's face was purple with rage. "You humiliate my daughter, break an engagement arranged between our fathers, and you think you can simply send a letter. What is the meaning of this?" "The meaning," Adrian said, descending the stairs with controlled grace, "is that I will not marry a woman who threatened an innocent person under my protection. Your daughter made it clear she values my title more than me. I see no reason to continue a farce." "An innocent person?" One of the other men, Victoria's brother, Rose guessed, laughed harshly. "You mean the serving girl? Victoria told us all about her, your little pet who's been warming your bed." Adrian moved so fast Rose barely saw it. One moment he was standing calmly, the next he had the younger man by the collar, slammed against the wall. "Finish that sentence and I'll call you out," Adrian said, his voice deadly quiet. "Rose Ashford has more integrity in her smallest finger than your entire family combined. You will not speak of her that way." "So it's true," Lord Pemberton said, his voice dripping with disdain. "You've thrown away an alliance between our families for a common whore. Get out." Adrian released Victoria's brother and turned to face Lord Pemberton. "Get out of my home before I have you thrown out. The engagement is over. Any attempts to damage Miss Ashford's reputation will be met with legal action and every bit of social influence I possess. Do I make myself clear?" "You'll regret this, Blackwood," Lord Pemberton hissed. "Victoria was willing to overlook your brooding nature and sad excuse for charm. You'll never find another woman of her breeding willing to marry you now. You'll be a laughingstock." "I can live with that," Adrian said flatly. The Pemberton men departed in a storm of threats and fury. Rose, hidden in the corridor, felt her heart hammering. Adrian had just made powerful enemies. For her, she should feel grateful, she supposed. Instead, she felt terrified. That afternoon, Adrian found her in the library, trying to work, but mostly staring at the same page of the catalogue she'd been staring at for an hour. He closed the door and leaned against it, suddenly looking exhausted. "Well," he said with grim humour, "that went about as badly as expected." Rose set down her pen. "Adrian, maybe this was a mistake. Maybe if you apologized to Lord Pemberton, say you were under stress." "No." Adrian crossed to her and pulled her to her feet, his hands gentle on her arms. "Rose, I meant what I said last night. I'm not giving you up. Not for the Pembertons, not for society, not for anyone. But they'll destroy us, then they'll destroy us together," Adrian interrupted. "Rose, look at me." He waited until her frightened grey eyes met his. I've spent my entire life doing what was expected, marrying who I was told to marry, being the perfect Earl, and I was miserable. You make me feel alive. Whatever comes, we'll face it, but I won't lose you." Rose felt tears slip down her cheeks. "I'm so scared. What if Mary suffers because of this? What if—" "Mary is safe," Adrian said firmly. "I've already sent word to London. She'll be brought here to Thornfield, given a position as a seamstress in the household with excellent wages. No one will touch her. I promise you that." Rose threw her arms around his neck, holding him tight. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you." Adrian held her close, his face buried in her hair. "Marry me," he said softly. "Not next year, not after the scandal dies down. Now. Let me make you my countess before anyone can try to separate us." Rose pulled back to look at him, her eyes wide. "Adrian, I know it's fast. I know society will call you a fortune hunter and me a fool. But I don't care, Rose. I love you, and I want everyone to know it." Rose searched his face and saw only certainty there. No doubt, no fear, just an iron determination to protect what was his. "Yes," she breathed. "Yes, I'll marry you." Adrian kissed her then, deep and claiming, and Rose felt the last of her resistance crumble. This was happening. She was going to become the Countess of Thornfield, and God help anyone who tried to stop them. The wedding took place 3 weeks later in Thornfield's private chapel, with only a handful of witnesses. Mrs. Henderson stood stiffly on one side, clearly disapproving but loyal to the Earl. Mary arrived from London, wide-eyed and overwhelmed, and cried through the entire ceremony. Dr. Fletcher served as one witness, and the elderly rector who'd known Adrian since childhood performed the service with a bemused expression. Rose wore a simple dress of cream silk that Adrian had insisted on buying for her. It wasn't a grand wedding gown. There hadn't been time, and Rose hadn't wanted the fuss. But when Adrian saw her walking down the chapel aisle, the look on his face made her feel like a princess. "You're so beautiful," he whispered when she reached him, and Rose felt her heart overflow. The ceremony was brief and traditional. Rose's voice shook when she said her vows, but Adrian's hand was steady around hers. When the rector pronounced them man and wife, Adrian kissed her with such tender passion that Mrs. Henderson cleared her throat pointedly, and Mary giggled despite her tears. Lady Rose Blackwood, Countess of Thornfield. It didn't feel real. The wedding breakfast was a small affair in the Manor's dining room. Mary chattered nervously about her journey from London and the beautiful room she'd been given. Dr. Fletcher offered dry toasts about love being the best medicine. Mrs. Henderson remained silent, though Rose noticed her lips twitching toward a smile once or twice, but the real world intruded before dessert was served. A messenger arrived with a stack of letters, responses to the wedding announcements Adrian had sent to London. He flipped through them at the table, his expression growing darker. "Well," he said finally, setting them aside, "we've been uninvited from the Ashworth Ball, the Riverside Garden Party, and Lady Cheltenham has written to inform me that we are no longer welcome at her home. Apparently associating with us would damage her daughter's prospects." Rose felt her stomach drop. "How many?" "About 2 dozen. Adrian reached for her hand. "It's all right. I expected this." "It's not all right," Rose said, her voice breaking. "You're losing your entire social circle because of me." "I'm losing people who only cared about my title," Adrian corrected. "Good riddance." But Rose could see the tension in his jaw, the way his fingers tightened on his wine glass. No matter what he said, this hurt. She'd cost him dearly. Over the next few weeks, the full extent of the scandal became clear. Invitations stopped coming. Old friends crossed the street to avoid them during their rare visits to the village. The local gentry, who had once sought Adrian's presence at every gathering, now whispered and turned away when they appeared. Rose tried to be strong, tried to hold her head high the way Adrian did. But every snub, every whispered insult, every cold shoulder felt like a knife to her heart. She'd known this would be difficult, but the reality of being publicly shunned was worse than anything she'd imagined. The worst moment came at the village market. Rose had insisted on shopping for herself. She refused to hide at Thornfield like a shameful secret. Adrian accompanied her, his hand steady at her back. They were examining vegetables when a group of aristocratic women approached. Rose recognized one of them, Lady Ashworth, who had apparently led the charge in cutting them socially. The woman looked Rose up and down with undisguised contempt. "Well," Lady Ashworth said loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear, "I see the former servant is playing at being a lady. How charming. Tell me, Blackwood, does she know which fork to use at dinner? Or do you keep her locked away so she won't embarrass you?" Adrian went rigid beside her. "Lady Ashworth, I suggest you choose your next words carefully. Or what? You'll defend your little charity case?" Lady Ashworth laughed, a cruel sound. "Everyone knows what she is, a fortune hunter who seduced you for your title. How long before she grows bored and moves on to richer prey?" Rose felt tears burn her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She would not give these people the satisfaction. But before she could speak, Adrian stepped forward, his voice cutting through the market like a blade. "Lady Ashworth, I'm going to say this once, and I suggest you share it with every gossip in Yorkshire. Rose is my wife. She is the Countess of Thornfield, and she has more nobility, grace, and genuine worth than anyone who would stand in a public market and insult her." His grey eyes were chips of ice. "You speak of breeding and manners, yet you behave like a common bully. If you ever speak to or about my wife in such a manner again, I will ensure that every person of consequence knows exactly what kind of woman you are. Do I make myself clear?" Lady Ashworth's face went white, then red. "You wouldn't dare—" "Try me," Adrian said flatly. The woman fled, her companions scattering like startled birds. The market had gone silent, everyone staring. Adrian turned to Rose and offered his arm as though nothing had happened. "Shall we finish shopping, my love?" Rose took his arm on trembling legs, and they completed their purchases in heavy silence. But once they were in the carriage heading home, Rose finally broke. "I can't do this," she whispered. "Adrian, I can't watch you lose everything because of me. I can't—" "Stop!" Adrian pulled her into his arms. "Rose, listen to me. Those people, they're not worth your tears. They're small and cruel and empty, and I would rather spend my life shunned by all of them than spend one day without you. Do you understand?" Rose clung to him, sobbing into his coat. "But you're suffering." "I'm living," Adrian corrected fiercely. "For the first time in years, I'm actually living. Yes, society has turned its back on us. But I have you, and that's worth more than all their balls and dinner parties combined." Rose wanted to believe him. But as the weeks turned into months and the isolation continued, she felt herself breaking under the weight of it. She'd never wanted to be a burden. She'd never wanted to be the reason Adrian lost the life he'd known. She started having nightmares about Victoria's threats coming true, about Mary being hurt because of Rose's choices, about Adrian waking up one day and realizing he'd made a terrible mistake. One cold November morning, Rose made a decision. She wrote 2 letters, one to Adrian, one to Mary, and packed a small bag. She would leave Thornfield, leave England if necessary. Adrian could claim she'd run off, get an annulment, marry someone appropriate. It would hurt him in the short term, but in the long run, he'd be better off. She made it as far as the front gates before Adrian caught her. He'd apparently woken early and found her letter, and he'd ridden after her without even stopping to saddle a horse properly. He slid off the horse's back and caught her by the shoulders, his eyes wild. "Where the hell do you think you're going?" he demanded. "Letting you go," Rose said, tears streaming down her face. "Adrian, I can't watch you suffer anymore. You've lost everything because of me." "I haven't lost everything," Adrian said fiercely. "I've lost people who never mattered. Rose, listen to me. The day you collapsed in my library, something shifted in my world. I'd been going through life half asleep, doing what was expected, feeling nothing. And then I saw you, this brave, beautiful woman who'd walked 30 miles in winter to survive, and I woke up. But the scandal will fade," Adrian interrupted. "New gossip will replace us. But if you leave me, If you walk away because you think you're protecting me, that will break me. Don't you understand? You're not my burden, Rose. You're my salvation." Rose looked into his eyes and saw the truth there, the love, the determination, the absolute refusal to let her go. "I'm so tired of fighting," she whispered. "Then stop fighting," Adrian said, pulling her close. "Stop trying to protect me from myself. Stop believing you're not worthy of this. You are my wife. You are the Countess of Thornfield, and I love you more than anything in this world. Please, Rose, come home." Rose buried her face in his chest and felt the last of her resistance shatter. "I love you," she sobbed. "I'm so sorry." "Don't apologize for having a heart," Adrian said, kissing her hair. "Just promise me you won't try to leave again. Whatever comes, we face it together. Promise me." "I promise," Rose whispered. Adrian lifted her onto his horse and climbed up behind her, holding her close as they rode back to Thornfield. The morning sun was rising over the moors, painting the sky in shades of gold, and Rose realized something. Maybe the rest of the world had turned its back on them, but in Adrian's arms she finally felt like she belonged. The turning point came from an unexpected source. 2 months after the wedding, Dr. Fletcher arrived at Thornfield with news. "Adrian, there's been an outbreak of scarlet fever in the village. It's spreading quickly among the poorer families. The regular doctor is overwhelmed and frankly useless. I need help. Supplies, volunteers, someone with authority who can organize relief efforts." Adrian looked at Rose. "We'll both help. What do you need?" Over the next 3 weeks, Rose and Adrian worked tirelessly in the village. They distributed medicine, food, and blankets. Rose, who'd grown up poor and understood how to talk to frightened families, proved invaluable. She sat with sick children, held the hands of worried mothers, and never once recoiled from the suffering around her. Adrian watched his wife move through cramped cottages with grace and genuine compassion, and fell in love with her all over again. She didn't help these people because she wanted to prove something to society. She helped because it was who she was. Kind, brave, generous, everything that truly mattered. The local gentry, who had been so quick to shun them, noticed. It was hard to maintain disdain for a woman who was nursing your neighbour's dying child. When Lady Ashworth's own housekeeper fell ill, and Rose personally tended to her for 3 days straight, the older woman's attitude began to shift. One afternoon, Rose was leaving a cottage after successfully helping a young mother through a difficult night with her feverish baby, when she found Lady Ashworth waiting outside. "Lady Thornfield," the older woman said stiffly, "I wanted to thank you for what you did for Mrs. Dobbs. She's worked in my household for 20 years. Rose was exhausted, her dress stained, her hair falling out of its pins, but she managed a polite nod. "Mrs. Dobbs is a good woman. I was happy to help." Lady Ashworth looked uncomfortable. "I also wanted to apologize for what I said at the market. It was cruel and undeserved. You've proven yourself to be more than I gave you credit for." Rose studied the older woman and saw genuine remorse there. "We all make mistakes, Lady Ashworth. What matters is what we do next." Lady Ashworth's expression softened slightly. "You're nothing like I expected. Victoria Pemberton spread such vicious rumors, but I see now she was simply a woman scorned." She hesitated, then added, "If you're willing, I would like to extend an invitation to you and Lord Thornfield. A small dinner party, nothing grand. A chance to start again." Rose felt tears prick her eyes. "We would be honored." It wasn't a complete social victory. There were still many who refused to accept them, but Lady Ashworth's public change of heart opened doors. Other families followed. Slowly, painfully, the wall of ice around them began to crack. Adrian found Rose that evening sitting in their private sitting room, staring into the fire. He knelt beside her chair and took her hands. "What are you thinking about?" "About how strange life is," Rose said softly. 6 months ago I was a servant scrubbing your floors. Now I'm a countess who's been invited to Lady Ashworth's dinner party. It doesn't seem real. You were always meant for this. Adrian said. Not the title or the money, that's just circumstance. But being someone who makes the world better just by being in it. That's who you've always been, Rose. Society is finally catching up. Rose touched his face, still amazed that this man was hers. Do you ever regret it? Marrying me? The scandal, the isolation? Never, Adrian said fiercely. Not once, not for a single moment. Rose, you saved me. Before you, I was just going through the motions of life. You made me want to actually live it. You saved me first, Rose reminded him. You saw me when I was invisible. You made me believe I could be more than what circumstances forced me to be. Adrian pulled her down to him and kissed her softly. Then we saved each other. Fair enough, Rose smiled against his lips. Fair enough. Spring came to Thornfield Castle with an explosion of colour and warmth. The gardens bloomed, the moors turned green, and Rose discovered she was pregnant. Adrian's joy was so profound and pure that it made Rose's heart ache. He became absurdly protective, barely letting her lift a finger, insisting she rest constantly. Adrian, I'm pregnant, not made of glass, Rose laughed as he fussed over her cushions for the third time. Humour me, he said, kissing her forehead. I'm going to be impossible for the next several months. Mary, who had settled beautifully into life at Thornfield and become close friends with several of the younger maids, was ecstatic about becoming an aunt. She spent hours helping Rose prepare the nursery, chattering about names and baby clothes. But the true test came when Adrian decided to host a ball at Thornfield, the first major social event since their marriage. It was a bold move, a declaration that they would no longer hide from society's judgment. Rose was terrified. What if no one comes? Then we'll dance alone in a beautiful ballroom, Adrian said calmly. But I think you'll be surprised. He was right. The invitations were accepted, not by everyone, but by enough people that the ball would be respectable. Lady Ashworth came, and several other families who had softened toward them. Even a few aristocrats from London made the journey, curious about the scandal that had dominated gossip for months. Rose stood at the top of the grand staircase in a gown of midnight blue silk that accommodated her growing belly, Adrian at her side. She was shaking as they prepared to descend and greet their guests. Breathe, Adrian whispered. You look like a queen. Let them see what I see. A woman of strength and grace who happens to be the love of my life. Rose took a deep breath and let Adrian lead her down the stairs. The assembled guests watched them descend, some with curiosity, some with lingering disapproval, but many with genuine warmth. Lady Ashworth was the first to greet them. Lady Thornfield, you look radiant. Marriage clearly agrees with you. Thank you, Lady Ashworth. I'm so glad you could come. As the evening progressed, Rose found herself surrounded by women who asked about her pregnancy, complimented her dress, and treated her as an equal. Not everyone was kind. There were still whispers and cold shoulders, but the tide had turned. They had weathered the worst of the scandal and emerged on the other side. Adrian watched Rose laugh with a group of ladies and felt pride swell in his chest. She was everything he'd known she would be. Graceful, kind, intelligent. She'd taken the title of Countess and made it her own, not by imitating the aristocrats who had rejected her, but by being authentically herself. Later, when the dancing began, Adrian led Rose onto the floor for the first waltz. The musicians played, and they moved together as though they'd been dancing their entire lives. Happy? Adrian asked, looking down at her with such love that Rose felt her breath catch. Happier than I ever imagined possible, Rose said honestly. Adrian, when I collapsed in your library that morning, I thought my life was over. I thought I'd reached the end of everything. But you picked me up and showed me I was just at the beginning. We were both at the beginning, Adrian corrected. You showed me what it meant to truly live, to risk everything for what matters. I love you, Rose Blackwood, more than I can ever properly express. I love you too, Rose whispered. Thank you for believing I belonged here. You've always belonged here, Adrian said, pulling her closer as they spun across the ballroom floor. "From the moment I saw you, something in me recognized something in you. You were meant to be mine, and I was meant to be yours. The rest was just details." Rose rested her head against his shoulder and let herself feel the full weight of her happiness. She was Lady Thornfield now. She was loved and valued and safe. Her sister was thriving. She was carrying Adrian's child. And the society that had tried to crush them had instead been forced to accept that love, real, transformative love, didn't follow rules about class or propriety. 5 months later, Rose gave birth to a daughter, just as autumn was painting the moors in shades of gold and copper. They named her Eleanor Grace, and she had her father's dark hair and her mother's grey eyes. Adrian wept when he first held her, this tiny, perfect being who represented everything good in his life. Rose, exhausted but radiant, watched her husband cradle their daughter and felt complete. She'd come so far from the desperate widow who'd collapsed on a library floor. That woman had been broken and afraid, trying simply to survive. But she'd been seen and lifted and loved. And in being loved, she'd learned to believe she deserved love. Thornfield Castle had become a true home. Mary lived happily in the estate, engaged now to a kind young man who worked in the village. The servants, who had once looked down on Rose, now treated her with genuine respect. Dr. Fletcher was a frequent visitor, charmed by baby Eleanor, and slowly, steadily, the social circles that had closed against them had reopened. Not all of them. Some would never forgive the scandal, but enough that Adrian and Rose could build a life rich with friendship and connection. One crisp October evening, Rose stood in the library, the place where everything had changed, with Eleanor in her arms. Adrian came up behind her and wrapped his arms around them both, creating a warm cocoon of family. "Do you remember what I said to you that first night?" Adrian asked softly. "When you were delirious with fever." "You told me I belonged here," Rose said. "I thought I'd dreamed it." "You didn't dream it," Adrian said. "I meant it then, even though I barely knew you. Something in me recognized that you belonged in this house in my life, and I was right." "Ah!" Rose turned in his arms, careful not to jostle the sleeping baby, and looked up at her husband with eyes full of love. "I know," she said simply. "For the first time in my life, I truly know where I belong." Adrian kissed her softly, then looked down at their daughter. "She's going to grow up knowing she's loved, knowing she has value beyond her circumstances. You're going to teach her that." "We're going to teach her that," Rose corrected, "together." Outside the library windows, the Yorkshire moors stretched endlessly under the twilight sky. Somewhere in London, the society that had tried to destroy them was moving on to new scandals, new gossip. But here, at Thornfield Castle, in this room full of books and memories and second chances, a family had been born from the ashes of broken expectations. Rose Ashford had fallen. Adrian Blackwood had lifted her. And together they'd proven that belonging wasn't about birthright or breeding or following society's rules. It was about recognizing yourself in another person, about choosing love over duty, compassion over cruelty, hope over fear. She belonged here, in this library where she'd collapsed and been saved, in these arms that had carried her when she couldn't stand, in this life that had seemed impossible but had become her reality. Eleanor stirred in her sleep and made a soft sound. Adrian smiled and gently took her from Rose, cradling the baby against his chest with practiced ease. "Let me take her up to the nursery. You should rest." Rose watched them go, her husband and her daughter, and felt her heart overflow with gratitude. She'd survived poverty and loss and scandal. She'd endured humiliation and doubt and fear. But she'd also discovered that she was stronger than she'd known, that she deserved happiness, that love, when it was real, could overcome anything. She walked to the window and looked out at the grounds of Thornfield Castle, now hers to call home. The moon was rising over the moors, casting everything in silver light. In the distance, she could see the village where she and Adrian had worked side by side during the epidemic, where she'd proven herself not through her title, but through her actions. Behind her, she heard Adrian return. He came to stand beside her, sliding his arm around her waist and pulling her close. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the night settle over their estate. "No regrets?" Adrian asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "Not a single one," Rose said, leaning into him. "Even the hard parts brought us here, made us who we are." "To think," Adrian mused, "if you hadn't pushed yourself past your limits that morning, if you hadn't collapsed in this very room, we might never have really seen each other." "And I think we would have found each other eventually," Rose said with certainty. "Some things are meant to be." Adrian pressed a kiss to her temple. "I love you, Lady Thornfield." "I love you too, Lord Thornfield," Rose replied, turning to face him fully. In the moonlight, his eyes were soft with affection and contentment. "Thank you for seeing me, for lifting me, for showing me I belonged." "Thank you for letting me," Adrian said, "for being brave enough to believe it." They kissed then, slow and sweet, surrounded by the books that had witnessed their journey from strangers to lovers to partners in every sense of the word. The library had been the site of Rose's lowest moment, collapsed on cold stone, feverish and desperate, but it had also become the symbol of her transformation, the place where she'd been seen, valued, and chosen. Upstairs, Eleanor slept peacefully in her nursery, dreaming baby dreams. In the servants' quarters, Mary was laughing with her fiancé. Throughout Thornfield Castle, life hummed with the quiet contentment of a household at peace. And in the library, two people who had defied every rule and overcome every obstacle stood wrapped in each other's arms, grateful for the courage it had taken to choose love over convention. They had built something real and lasting, not just a marriage, but a partnership forged in adversity and strengthened by unwavering commitment. Rose Blackwood, once invisible and discarded by the world, now stood as the mistress of a grand estate and the heart of a loving family. She had learned that belonging wasn't given, it was claimed, not through manipulation or social climbing, but through being authentically herself and finding someone who loved her for exactly who she was. As they finally left the library and headed upstairs to their chambers, Adrian paused at the doorway and looked back at the room. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "this is my favorite room in the entire house." "Mine too," Rose agreed, understanding what he meant. "This is where our story began." "No," Adrian corrected gently, taking her hand. "This is where our story became possible. It began the moment I saw you and knew somehow that you would change everything." They climbed the stairs together, fingers intertwined, hearts aligned. Behind them, the library stood quiet and still, keeping its secrets and its promises. Ahead of them stretched the rest of their lives, full of challenges and joys, struggles and triumphs, but always, always grounded in the love they'd fought so hard to protect. Rose had belonged here all along. She just needed someone to see it, to believe it, to lift her up and whisper those transformative words, "You belong here." And now, finally, she did.